Just had a pretty boring day at work.
Pretty boring
How's everyone
day.
doing tonight?
Oh, you went live early.
Yeah, we did. Some of the talk that happens beforehand on this stuff sometimes definitely want to catch it. But here we are once again in Inside Movies Galore. People, welcome. Sorry, last week we tried to do this, and it failed. But we are back once again, folks, and in the room we have Dane. Dane, why don't you introduce yourself once again?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dane Kyle. I'm an up-and-coming writer-director, and I have upcoming film noir, The Big Blind, going to be released this year. Other things that you can find on YouTube, and definitely looking to two of this nice discussion.
Cool. Alrighty, and welcome to his right is the one and only Tito. Tito, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Tito Johnson, and I like turtles.
You too, kid.
Any case, also in the room we have the diva of the group. Welcome, Celeste. Welcome back to the room.
Hi, I'm Celeste. I am a co-host on the horror host show Dudger's Dark Coffin Classics. I love horror movies, so I'm excited to be talking about these movies tonight.
Awesome. So the two movies that we have in store for you, folks, is the one and only House of a Thousand Corpses, which was directed by Rob Zombie in 2003. And its direct sequel, which was done in 2005, called The Devil's Rejects. So let's go to Celeste. Why don't you give us your first viewing of House of a Thousand Corpses, and what was your perspective of it?
Well, I actually watched House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects back to back in 2005. So as soon as Devil's Rejects came out, I got both of them. A friend loaned them to me, and I just sat and watched them straight. So my experience was a little bit altered by seeing the differences in what changed in the characters, how they were shot. They were like completely different films. There was a lot of character differences. But I really loved at the time House of a Thousand Corpses and how over the top it was and how bizarre it was.
Okay. Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about your first experience with House of a Thousand Corpses? What was your perspective of it then, and what is your perspective of it now?
Well, much less said, I watched them back to back. I watched them a few weeks ago for these discussions. The Devil's Rejects, even though I thought stylistically both were very strong. House of a Thousand Corpses has more of a psychedelic music video feel to it because it was Rob Zombie's first feature film after having directed his own music videos prior to that. So influences still shine very strong in that film. Quality of overall filmmaking and acting does significantly improve by the time we get to The Devil's Rejects. But there's plenty to be interested in with House of a Thousand Corpses, particularly how trippy it is, how the production design is really strong. It has a good sense of atmosphere, and most of his filmography, it does kind of have a horror cartoony feel to it. So yeah, they all have their strengths, but definitely I thought overall The Devil's Rejects was a much stronger film, and in terms of how it affected me or whatever, I would say House of a Thousand Corpses you know, it has much of a strong impact on me as it might have been. It might have had a stronger impact on me if I had been the target audience and had seen it in a theater after that through a slog of teen slasher movies from the late 90s and early 2000s, which is unquestionably something very different, which is different. Certainly at that time would have been a good thing.
Definitely, definitely. Tito, why don't you explain when you first saw House of a Thousand Corpses, and what was your first perspective of the film, and what is your perspective of it now?
Well, I actually saw Devil's Rejects first, and then somehow House of a Thousand Corpses slipped past me without me catching it. And I enjoyed Devil's Rejects so much that I actually went back and found a House of a Thousand Corpses. And I had heard that it was better. I prefer Devil's Rejects better. I like the way it feels because it feels like kind of helter-skelter, kind of crazy. And they have that Texas Chainsaw Massacre feel to them that I really enjoy, those type of films. I enjoyed the acting in both films, and they both had a lot. Obviously, it's like a part one and part two, but those films to me actually seem like they could stand alone on their own. There doesn't have to be like the crossover. But the crossover, I think the crossover comes nicely. You can see the change in Rob Zombie as he adds different music to his film, The Devil's Rejects. Because in the first one, I believe he basically just used all his actual music. So I mean, I'm glad we started with these two films because they're both up there for me, both enjoyable to watch.
And I'm glad that we started with these two because not a lot of horror films are actually done by or directed by rock and rollists, So definitely it was a different feel for both films for myself as well. I saw Devil's Rejects first, and then later I went back and watched House of a Thousand Corpses. I didn't catch them in the theater like I wanted to at the time, but both films as well. But as we know, the House of a Thousand Corpses is more cheesier and has over-the-top acting, but so does the second one a little bit with the Sheriff Wydell as well. So now that we're starting to talk about, what do any of you have an idea of what ideas did Rob Zombie have to portray in this film? Celeste, why don't you tell me what kind of depraved madness that Rob Zombie had?
I mean, everything he did was sort of, I mean, it was scary because it was one of those things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre where you're like, this could actually happen. There could be some weird family somewhere in the middle of nowhere that actually does this. But they're so over the top about it that it's actually sort of more scary because it's like cartoonish, like was mentioned, but it has this sense of like, well, it's possible. The thing that with House of a Thousand Corpses was it was kind of disjointed. It felt like it was broken up into sections. It didn't all quite go together, even though I love the movie. So adding the Dr. Satan kind of, it seems like an afterthought and kind of forgettable as well. And he, of course, wasn't in Devil's Rejects, so it was sort of confusing adding him into there. And that added sort of a different element to the movie, and it seemed like a whole different movie when that part was added.
Yeah, it did kind of seem that way, didn't it? Especially since the character of Dr. Satan was actually played by one Walter Felling, which was a character that definitely added to her. So, Dane, how do you feel about the Dr. Satan character?
in House of Thousand Corpses, and not in The Haunted World of El Superbeasto.
Correct.
Very different characters there, despite having the same name. Um, I thought that the whole myth of Dr. Satan in House of a Thousand Corpses, it only really has significance in propelling our characters towards their eventual demise, and then seeing what is admittedly a very cool looking, those two creatures in the underneath the house, which I assume is what we're supposed to assume is Dr. Satan, which to me, honestly, they look like Todd McFarlane toys that were life size. Which, Todd McFarlane toys tend to be pretty darn cool looking, and so were those, but they had very, very little bearing on the actual plot as it existed, so it really could have been anything, and so you might just chalk that up to Rob Zombie's kind of sloppy screenwriting at that time, which he admittedly got a lot better at with The Devil's Rejects, but yeah, it just was not anything too terribly substantive. It was just more of a thing to be cartoonish and strange, which all of his work tends to be cartoonish and strange in some form or fashion, whether it's literal, like The Haunted World of El Superbeasto, or this, where it was basically like live action cartoons, and at least in my opinion, in terms of the acting, not always in a good way. But yeah, in terms of design, though, the Dr. Satan creatures looked really cool. I would have liked to have seen them in their own Alien or Predator type movie, because they had a cool look. But yeah, they just had very little to do with the actual plot.
Well, Tito, what did you think about the Dr. Satan character? Did you also believe that it was an added afterthought?
Yeah, they kind of talked. To me, they kind of talked about it right from the beginning when they were sending them out to that farm, the house, where Captain Spaulding went ahead and wrote that map out. They sent that cop there as well. He wrote the same map out for him. I could see how it's an afterthought because it's just at the end, and they kind of show his tunnel, right, where they have all the corpses laying out and about. There's a couple things I really liked. I wouldn't mind having a haunted house that was kind of like that murder ride they had there.
Well, actually, now that you mention that, Rob Zombie did design a serial killer haunted house that was very much like what it was in the movie, and that was after the movie. Prior to the movie, he had designed haunted house attractions for Universal. Universal, they were the original distributors of House of a Thousand Corpses, but they thought it was too weird and they thought it would get an NC-17, so they decided not to distribute it. He bought the rights back, tried to get it through MGM, had troubles with them, and then finally got it through Lionsgate.
It's interesting. So, what did we think about Karen Black's character? Anyone? Why don't we start with you, Tito?
Well, Karen Black, right? Sadly she passed away, but she's been in a lot of movies, right, over her career, and I think she really plays it well. She has a lot of the facial expressions, which in the second one they did that, also for the since she didn't come back for The Devil's Rejects. You could tell that she loved her children in that movie, and in both of the movies you could tell that she was somewhat human, as she had feelings for her children, but just maybe not anybody else at all.
Okay, so Dane, what did you think of the character that Karen Black played as Mama Firefly?
Yeah, I think Mama Firefly was easily the weakest of the family, particularly when she was played by Karen Black, which I hate to say because Karen Black has done great work, especially in her Oscar-nominated performance in 5 Easy Pieces, excellent Jack Nicholson film from 1970. This is not a good performance from her. It's not an especially well-written character because she's very over the top in a not good way. And both Karen Black and Sherry Moon Zombie in the first film, neither one of them really know how to be over the top and how to be real at the same time, which is definitely possible. It is a tricky mix, but you can do it. Neither one of them did, and they felt like they were acting in quotes and not really being present in the moment, which is what good acting is. Um, and I think the person who played Mama in the second film, whose name always escapes me, um, she did
Oh,
a slightly better job. But say again.
that would be Leslie.
Yeah, I mean, yes, she did a slightly better job, but again, I just don't really think it exists. The depth, I don't think that the depth existed really on the page, and that really, for the most part, does determine the ability of an actor to. It's a lot. It's a lot easier to be able to deliver a good performance when it exists on the page. Is what I'm trying to say. And in my opinion, I don't really think that it existed on the page in the same way that it did for other characters. Unlike, and I also don't think that either one of that Karen Black, the feel for the material in the same way that, say, Bill Moseley or especially uh, Sid Haig did, because I felt like they understood how to be over the top and yet emotionally truthful.
Well, Celeste, do you have the same opinions as Dane, or do you agree with Tito?
Well, I have to say that no movie role Karen Black could ever do would compare to her interviews, in my estimation. Her interviews are awesome. So I would have to say, yes, it's not one of her better roles. I still like the character, but I do think it's one of the weaker, more forgettable characters.
See, I
Yeah,
think her and Baby were trying to go over the top. So,
I
maybe Baby's acting wasn't on par there with the Bill Moseley and Sid Haig. I could definitely say that, but I think they were trying to go for that over top
I liked
acting
Baby
part.
though. It worked for her. Mama was fine. I actually really liked her too. It's just she didn't stand out as much, and switching the actress didn't make much of a difference, and it should have. I feel like if you play a character really well, you should notice and care if they switch the actor.
When Mama's out of the plot for most of the Devil's Rejects.
Right.
very true. Most of the time, she's tied up to Sheriff Wydell's pleasure. So, but in my mind, yes, Karen Black's character was very forgettable. I really couldn't entirely see Karen Black as Mama Firefly. It was not one of her better performances in my mind. So I almost think that if you took the Mama character, also you didn't see much of the grandpa guy too.
No,
Yeah, there are a lot of characters missing in the sequel.
like Tiny was
yeah.
barely in it.
Which, and by the way, that's a point I was wanting to bring up was if you had just watched The Devil's Rejects and you saw Tiny, he would stick out like a sore thumb. Pretty badly, in fact.
Right.
So
He just
now
he doesn't fit with the rest of the movie.
no, he does not. But now that we are talking about Tiny, what did you think of Tiny's character in House of a Thousand Corpses?
I think Lurch should sue them. That's what I think.
Tito, what do you think?
I think he had a hell of a Halloween costume on. If you remember that.
And that might be. Well, what do you think, Celeste?
I like Tiny. I thought he was interesting character. You really didn't find out much about him. He seemed more like part of the scenery, but in a good way. And I thought it was really funny when I bought the figure of Tiny. There was a joke they did in the behind the scenes of the movies where Baby, Captain Spaulding, and Otis were sitting around telling knock-knock jokes about Tiny. The joke was, knock, knock, who's there? Tiny fucked a stump, for no good reason. And then they would all laugh about it, and they did it in Spanish and everything. It was really hilarious. Anyway, so the figure of Tiny came with a little stump that had a little hole in it, and I don't think many people would have gotten why it did, but I thought it was a cool joke, so that made me like the character.
Now, Dave, did you not get what I said about his Halloween costume?
Oh yeah,
What you said
I
about
did. And speaking of which, I think not only should Lurch sue, but I think that Harvey Dent should give Lurch a lesson about what it's like to be a burn victim.
See, I enjoy the one scene that I remember in House of a Thousand Corpses was, with Tiny is when the girl, the one victim, was tied up on the bed, and he almost allowed her to leave.
Yeah, he let her go and said
Right.
goodbye, and then Mosley came right up and grabbed her.
Exactly, and that's the one moment that I remember. Besides his performance in the beginning of The Devil's Rejects, which now that I will be getting to. What I'm going to start with you this time. What was your response? And I'm sure you said this before, but what was your response to seeing The Devil's Rejects the first time? I know you said you watched it back to back, but and what is your response now? Your reaction to the film then and now.
Where would you like
Who are
to
you talking
start?
to there?
Yeah.
That was to you, Celeste.
Anywhere you want. Start anywhere you want.
Females first.
Okay. I love Devil's Rejects. It seemed kind of harsher to me, more gritty. So I like that about it. I liked seeing the differences in the characters because even though I love the characters in House of a Thousand Corpses, I still enjoy them in Devil's Rejects just as much. Though there was changes. Otis was my favorite character, so I liked seeing his evolution. He probably changed the most. He almost looked albino in the first one. They changed his look a lot. They changed his character a lot. He was less philosophical. So I couldn't watch it without directly comparing the two because I watched them back to back. And had I seen Devil's Rejects first, I'm not sure I would have liked House of a Thousand Corpses as much as I had. But I thought it was a great sequel without being more of the same.
Tito, what was your response to? What was your reaction to seeing The Devil's Rejects the first time, and what was your reaction to seeing it recently?
Well, when I watched the first time, I was actually blown away by it. I thought the soundtrack was outstanding, using that rock and roll. The sheriff in that film was just as sadistic as the entire Firefly family. The music at the end, when they're in the car ride with Freebird, a perfect ending to the movie with the shootout. I basically I put the movie back in and watched it right after I just got done. Maybe I got something to drink and sat down and rewatched it. I liked it so much.
Okay, Dane, what was your response or reaction to seeing Devil's Rejects for the first time, and what was your reaction to it recently? Noticed anything?
Well, I like Celeste. I watched him back to back, and I thought The Devil's Rejects was a significant improvement in terms of filmmaking and storytelling style, thematic resonance, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the soundtrack was a wise choice to have it be classic rock from the period. And yeah, definitely a more complete story, more personal story, perhaps. I think it had a good commentary on sadism of criminals juxtaposed with the sadism of the one seeking justice, which turns into vengeance, which turns into its own kind of sadism, that being Sheriff Waddell. And great whenever you can have your sympathies change, um, for those. I love it whenever movies are able to do that. I think A Clockwork Orange is, of course, the paramount example of that, and I think that it was definitely building off of that model. Um, and yeah, I think it just overall it was more sure of itself, and it just was rooted in things that were more truthful. The thing I would say, which I don't know if a lot of people have talked about, is aside from Tiny and connections to the first film very loosely, it's not really horror in the word. It feels very true crime, which it absolutely, you could call it that for sure. That's kind of a question I would pose to the group: is it really horror? You know.
Well, when I saw Devil's Rejects for the first time, I loved its grittiness at the time. I loved that it had a grindhouse feel, because I don't know why. I just love that, graininess to a film that makes it a little older or whatnot, even though it's this and that. And ultimately, I think that's what first draws me to a film sometimes too. But I remember thinking that Sherry Moon's character was serious, sir, and that she wasn't so yeah, that she definitely did not do that this time, and I think that worked for her character this time too. But on the same level, you see the contrast of the two characters, and it's like, okay, she's not so much of a dumb blonde anymore. you know and as Dane has mentioned to me before in the past, definitely loves to go for that ass shot. So, what do you think, Tito, of that zeroing in on Sherry Moon's ass?
I mean, it's not a big ass, right? It's kind of small. She's kind of a petite woman, but the ass fits her, right? And I don't mind looking at it. You know what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying.
That's kind of like his calling sign, right? That Salem's movie, the witch movie, right? That's where it starts off. She's laying naked in the bed, right? And he's always going to have that ass part. So her jeans in this one, where her ass cheeks were showing, she had her pajama bottoms on in House of a Thousand Corpses, where the top of her ass was hanging out. So you didn't get the cheeks, you got the top. It's an ass, right?
Dane, I know that you mentioned it first. What do you think about that aspect of the film?
For myself, well, it's definitely a sign of the more fetishistic side of directing when it comes to the writer-directors who just cannot resist their particular predilections. Quentin Tarantino has his foot fetish, after all, in every one of his movies, and it's different directors have their preoccupations, and Sherry Moon Zombie obviously does not have any shyness about the situation. So it's just it gets more comical the more that you explore his filmography, and just the degree to which neither one of them can resist such a thing. And to the point where it gets so Devil's Reject, she's like, "Hit me right in the ass," and she says in that. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if the woman actually did that, bleed a little bit and you couldn't sit down a lot, but you're not going to die more than likely from that. So yeah, big threat there. Um, and so sometimes it gets to the point of just sheer ridiculousness, and other times, like in the Haunted World of El Super Beasto, they just go for it. Now there, it's animated, but still, it's like there they just dive into it. There's no going back.
Celeste, what did you think about that aspect of the film?
I love it. I love Sherry Moon Zombie. I think it's awesome that Rob Zombie uses her for everything. You know, if she likes showing her ass and he likes showing her ass, go for it.
A lot of people tend to think about Rob Zombie's films that he uses his wife a lot in his films, and are tired of seeing um, Sherry Moon in in his films. Does anyone else have that same conclusion when you think about seeing her in both of these films? Do you have anything against seeing her in any future productions that might be producing it?
Well, I saw 31, and I didn't think her acting was that great in 31 myself. I think she did better in these two movies that we're discussing tonight.
I actually tend to agree with you, but we can definitely get 31 down the road. Anyone else have anything to say about the possible influence or not influence of Sherry Moon Zombie in any further film down the road for Rob Zombie?
That's one of the things I look forward to in his movies. I love her. I like, even when her acting's not so great, it's one of those things where I know she's going to be in it, and I'm always interested to see what part she'll play and how she'll play it.
Yeah, it should be said that it's not just her. It's kind of the whole traveling show aspect of his films, which again is a similarity to someone like Tarantino, who tends to cast a lot of the same actors over and over again. Kevin Smith's the same way. It's that kind of that 80s, 2000s generation of directors who might have grown up on 70s films. So it's not just her, it's Sid Haig, it's Bill Moseley. A lot of them tend to follow him around. Malcolm McDowell has been in several of his films. As far as her specifically, yeah, her acting can be rather sporadic. There's been plenty of times where it's been pretty good, like in The Lords of Salem, and she actually wanted to be a voice actress prior to being a dancer, a choreographer, and then finally an actress for Rob Zombie. And so she got to be a voice actress in The Haunted World of El Super Beasto, which you could argue is where she's most suited, because she's got a voice, and I mean that as a compliment. So yeah, it can be rather sporadic, but she's obviously his wife. She's easy to get a hold of. What he wants her to do, and if he for it.
Well, going back to the conversation that the Sheriff Rydell had with the movie critic, just wanted to mention this again, like I did in the failed audio broadcast last week. What did you think about the where they basically connected the family to the Marx Brothers? Celeste, what did you think about that?
I actually didn't think it was necessary to say that, but it was interesting. It wasn't really my favorite aspect of the movie, but it was okay.
What did you think of that connection, so to speak?
I thought it was interesting where they put the all the names were actually out of Marx from the Marx Brothers. It was cool with that. Something else to think about. Maybe after while you're watching the movie, you just listen to it, but afterwards you can kind of think about it, and maybe like there's some hidden messages there.
Okay. Dane, what did you think about that aspect of the film?
I like the fact that they're all named after Groucho Marx characters. I like that. I didn't like the fact that it was pretty explicitly spelled out. I would have preferred if it had been a fun little Easter egg for Marx Brothers fans. And the whole scene with the critic, I thought was a little unnecessary. It's much like it was Rob Zombie sort of taking a sledgehammer
That was
to. Well, it felt like it was him taking a sledgehammer to the critical community as a whole. In a way that was just like, I don't know, this is just kind of wasting our time. It did lead to the funny thing where it's like, if you ever, say anything bad about Elvis Aaron Presley again, like that part was kind of funny, but it just overall, it felt very kind of self-serving, and it spelled out what should have been a fun Easter egg for Marx Brothers fans, which Rob Zombie is one, and he's going to be doing Raised Eyebrows, a non-horror film for once, about the later years of Groucho Marx.
Now, do you think he did that with the critic because of his first film, The House of a Thousand Corpses? The critics pretty much bashed it, I think, when it first came out, and then it started to have a fan following or cult type following to his movies.
It's possible, sure. I mean, I don't want to get inside of his motivations necessarily, but we live in a world where the 1998 Godzilla had Mayor Ebert and his aide Gene, who looked like Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert themselves, the real critics. They themselves said, if you're going to put us in a monster movie, why don't you have the monster eat or squash us, which they didn't even do that. So, I mean, at the very least, Rob Zombie had that change with Sheriff Wydell. So, again, I don't want to speak for him, but the timing of it relative to how his first film was not all that well received critically could be looked at as self-serving.
Okay. So, getting back to the cameos, did anyone notice that Danny Trejo showed up? And not to mention that the critic was actually Salmonius from Xena, the Legendary Journey.
Danny Trejo is great in anything.
I mean, for a laugh factor, maybe.
For a
Yeah, I
laugh
love
factor. So, in any case, does anyone else?
Oh wait, I was gonna say my favorite cameo was the girl from the Warriors, Mercy from the Warriors. She was in one scene in or a little bit of Devil's Rejects.
Okay.
Well, and let's not forget about not yet star Rainn Wilson, who would later go on to be in The Office, who was in House of a Thousand Corpses. Fish Boy, as he's known.
And
I love Fish Boy.
He was also Link in Galaxy Quest, which is where I remembered him from.
The Office was a great comedy. It was on quite a while, many seasons. And he also played a superhero in a movie called Super, where he went around with a pipe wrench and just bashed people's heads in.
Written and directed by James Gunn, who went on to do Guardians of the Galaxy.
What a jump that was.
Definitely. But in any case, does anyone else have anything to add to either one of the two films?
What about the classification of The Devil's Rejects as horror? What do you think about that?
I felt like it was a horror movie because it reminded me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that kind of genre of horror. And like, I can't think of any other classification for it.
I know you mentioned like a true crime earlier, and we kind of just passed over that, but I can see where you're coming from a little bit on that, I think. But since the killings and stuff were happening in front of us in like real time watching it, that's where I was kind of more like it's horror than the true crime.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre thing, or like at the very least exploitation, which unquestionably it's drawing from 70s exploitation kind of grindhouse films, which both Rob Zombie, Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Eli Roth, they're all from that 70s exploitation generation. So I can definitely see the connection there. But you could have, like, someone else could have done this same story and made it the true crime kind of film because it's not that far removed from reality. Um, but yeah, I do think stylistically you can definitely put it in the realm of grindhouse horror, possibly.
I would say the same. Because horror is a very loose, very loose genre. There's a lot of films that you could put into the horror category. Because obviously, any crime that has anything to do with murder or death or something of that nature can be classified as horror. So, I mean, face it, life is horrifying. But in any case, why don't we wrap this up Celeste, where are you from? What do you do? Tell us a little bit about yourself that you didn't before.
I am based out of Wisconsin. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm the co-host on a horror host TV show, the host being Dedgar Winter, the name of it being Dedgar's Dark Coffin Classics. If you'd like to look it up, you can find us on Vimeo at vimeo.com/ddcc. And I am also the host for a burlesque troupe called Glamour Junkies Burlesque out of Milwaukee.
Dane, I know you mentioned a bit about yourself in the beginning, but why don't you tell us where we can find you and a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, so once again, I'm a writer-director, kind of up and coming on the film scene, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina for now. You can find me on YouTube at the Dane Kyle, DaneKeil. That's the YouTube channel name. You can find me on Twitter with the same handle. You can find me on Facebook. And as far as what I've done, I did a short film called Eternus, which is a black and white German expressionist silent film, which I would love to talk about on here if ever anyone wants to know more about it. And it got a lot of praise from Peyton Reed, who directed Ant-Man, Lloyd Kaufman of Troma, and Charles Kyoto of the Kyoto Brothers. They loved it. And then my up-and-coming short film, The Big Blind, is going to be a black and white film noir. It's another short, but those are both preceding my first foray into feature filmmaking, which I'd like to start next year.
And sort of told us about what you do or what you had done. I understand you've been on YouTube and you've been in a few other film projects. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm pretty much basically I'm not the expert, right? You three are the experts on this channel. I'm just throwing in for the average below intelligence guy that can throw in a few things about what I think about films. Yeah, I did movie reviews before on YouTube. Had a little falling out with the person I was doing them with. He just kind of went off into thin air. I don't even know what happened. I hope he's okay to this day. Yeah, I was
Maybe
in a
the
couple
Fireflies got him.
I mean, I really don't know what happened, right? I was in a couple movies just as an extra with Nate Rumler. He's got a Gay for Prey movie coming out. And then Blowing Raspberries, I actually played a police officer in that. And that's who I was on YouTube with, was Ricky Shore. I haven't talked to him in about a year. I hope he's doing okay. But pretty much I'm just the dumb guy that likes to watch movies, and I can talk about them with you guys, and I appreciate you listening to me.
Can you blow a raspberry for us right now?
No, I just shaved. I apologize.
Well, then that kind of defeats the authenticity factor, doesn't it? Shameful. Shameful.
Well, in any case, folks, hopefully you enjoyed the show. We did get a little rowdy, but that's okay. Okay, we have more time to have a night of debauchery with you folks, and hopefully you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned for another episode next week, probably same day, same time.